There are two sets of interactive listening questions on the Duolingo English Test. And this question type has a new format that started on July 1st, 2025. So as you are preparing, make sure that you are using study materials that use the new format for this question type. There are 4 parts to an interactive listening set of questions. The first part is the scenario. Number 2, listen and complete questions. Number 3, listen and respond questions. And finally, the summarize the conversation question. In this video, we are going to cover the first 3 parts. And in another video, which you can find over here, we are going to cover the final part, summarize the conversation. The scenario looks like this. Previously, you read this scenario, but since July 1st, 2025, you now listen to the scenario. But here is an example scenario written out. Again, on the test, you will have to listen to the scenario, but it is written here so that you can more easily see what a typical scenario looks like. Allow me to read this one out loud. You are a student in the public service department at your university. You have been invited to interview for a few jobs, and you want to make sure that you are prepared. You go to your professor, who has years of experience in the public service sector, and ask for advice on how to prepare for interviews. So after you listen to this scenario one time, then you will see the listen and complete questions like so. And you will have 3 or 4 listen and complete questions, and these questions test your comprehension of the scenario. So here are the listen and complete questions from this example. What department are you studying in? Then you will be given a sentence with some part missing, and you have to fill in that missing part using information from the scenario. So, what department are you studying in? I am in the blank department. The correct answer is, I am in the public service department. What are you getting ready to do? I am getting ready to blank. I am getting ready to interview for a few jobs. Who do you ask for guidance? I ask blank. I ask my professor. Why do you want advice? I want to be blank. I want to be prepared for the interviews. Here are key tips for the scenario and the listen and complete questions. So in listen and complete questions, Duolingo likes to ask about the following. Who are you talking to? For example, who do you ask for guidance? Why are you talking to them? What are you getting ready to do? That was the question from the example. That is about why you are talking to your professor. You were also asked, why do you want advice? So we had 2 questions related to why we talked to our professor. And what academic subject is relevant to your discussion? In our example, that question was, what department are you studying in? So typically, interactive listening questions are about academic subjects. They take place in an academic setting. So usually there is some academic subject that is relevant to the conversation and that Duolingo likes to ask about. It's important to note that you can listen to the scenario as many times as you like. So when you come to an interactive listening question, you have to listen to the scenario one time before you can see the listen and complete questions. But then you can listen to the scenario multiple times in order to find the information that you need to correctly answer the listen and complete questions. And I recommend that you listen to the scenario before you answer each question. That way, you can be sure that you have the correct answer using the correct words for each listen and complete question. Here are more tips. Focus on the ideas in the scenario. So Duolingo says minor spelling, punctuation, and grammar errors do not matter as long as the errors that you make do not change the meaning. So if you have some minor typos or grammatical errors, that's fine, as long as it is clear what you wrote. However, if your spelling or grammar mistakes are so bad that it is difficult or impossible to understand what you have written, then you are going to lose points. You do not need to write down the answer exactly as you hear it. So Duolingo says in their official materials, you can paraphrase the answer. Paraphrase means to say or write something using your own words. Some questions might even require you to paraphrase. So I would encourage you to use the language in this scenario as closely as possible. This is so that you can be sure that you have the correct answer. However, it may not always be possible to write down exactly what is said in the scenario in order to answer a listen and complete question. You may have to express those ideas in your own words. However, in general, again, I recommend just use the language as it appears in the scenario. There is a limit to how much you can write. Your answers will likely be less than 5 words, but almost never more than 10. So I say almost never because Duolingo is always using new questions on the test and tweaking things, so it's hard to say what is always true or never true. However, if your answer is longer than 10 words to a listen and complete question, you should pause and really think about whether that is the correct answer or something shorter could be better. Because from the questions we have seen, most of the answers are less than 5, only a few are more than 5, and we haven't seen any questions with answers that have more than 10 words. You have one timer for 6.5 minutes for the scenario, listen and complete, and listen and respond, which we are going to look at next. Therefore, you should spend at most 2.5 minutes on the scenario and listen and complete so that you have 4 minutes at least for listen and respond. So for interactive listening and interactive reading, you have one timer for multiple questions. So it is important that you pace yourself. You do not want to use up all of your time early on in the questions, because then you will have no time for the later questions and you will get 0 points if you don't answer those questions. So that's why it's important. Keep an eye on the timer and don't use more than 2.5 minutes to answer the listen and complete questions. Okay, let's now turn to listen and respond. So after you answer the listen and complete questions, you then move on to the listen and respond questions. And there are approximately 5 listen and respond questions. There could be more, 6 or 7, sometimes maybe even less, 4, but usually around 5. And you have to select the most appropriate response to what the other person says. So These listen and respond questions really simulate a conversation. The other person says something, you listen to it, then you pick the best response from the options that Duolingo gives you. It goes back and forth like that about 5 times. It's important to remember that you can only listen to what the other person says one time. Okay? So you'll listen to what they say one time, pick the best response. Then they'll say a new thing, and you can only listen to that one time, and then you pick another response. Okay? But you can only listen to each thing that they say one time. Sometimes the first listen and respond question actually starts the conversation. And that's what we have in this example. So instead of responding to what the other person says, you are going to be the first one to speak, and you will pick the best way to start the conversation. Here's the first tip for listen and respond. Use process of elimination. What process of elimination is, it means that you eliminate the bad options so that you are left with the one correct option. So let's work through the example or continue the example that we started before. So here are the options that you're given for question number 1, for listen and respond number 1. Professor, I wanted to say thank you and let you know that I've been accepted into a graduate program. Hi, Professor. I'm here to talk to you about my final grade in the class. Professor, I wanted to get your advice about something. Hi, Professor. I wanted to ask for your advice about which courses would best prepare me for a career in teaching. Professor, I'm struggling in your class. I'm having trouble understanding the material and I'm falling behind. So now let's go option by option and eliminate all of the bad ones. The first one, Professor, I wanted to say thank you and let you know that I've been accepted into a graduate program. Is that an appropriate way to start the conversation given this scenario? So remember, in this scenario, we have been invited for some job interviews and we want to make sure that we are prepared. So we go to our professor for advice. Given that information, does this first option here, which says that I've been accepted into graduate school, make sense? No. Okay. In this scenario, there's no mention of graduate school. That option is irrelevant. Next one. Hi, Professor. I'm here to talk to you about my final grade in the class. Is that a relevant option? No. Number 3. Hi, Professor. I wanted to get your advice about something. Now, this option is quite vague. Advice about what? However, is it a bad option? Is it irrelevant to the scenario? No. Although it is vague, it is relevant to the scenario. So we shouldn't eliminate it. Hi, Professor. I wanted to ask for your advice about which courses would best prepare me for a career in teaching. Well, here it's more specific, right? It's saying advice about which courses would best prepare me for a career in teaching. However, in this scenario, it says that we want advice about preparing for job interviews, not about which courses would best prepare us for a career in teaching. So we can eliminate that option. And finally, Professor, I'm struggling in your class. I'm having trouble understanding the material and I'm falling behind. Is that option relevant? No. So, via process of elimination, we eliminated options 1, 2, 4, and 5, leaving us with option number 3. Professor, I wanted to get your advice about something. Tip number 2, evaluate all options. So it's important when you have multiple choice questions on the DET that you evaluate all the options so that you can find the best answer. Duolingo likes to put options that seem correct. They make sense. They seem like good options. However, that they are not the best options. There will always be one option for multiple choice questions that is the best. And that's the one that you have to pick. And that's why it's important to evaluate all of the options. Don't stop at the first option that seems correct. You have to look at all of them. All right, so here's an example of the next listen and respond question. So the professor responds, "Of course. What is it?" And here are your options. "I have a few upcoming interviews and I wanted to know if you had any suggestions on how I can improve my interviewing skills." "Well, I've never had a job interview in a foreign language before, so I'm not really sure what to expect. Do you have any suggestions on what I should do to prepare?" "I wanted to ask for your advice, actually. This is a really big opportunity for me, and I want to make sure that I'm as prepared as possible." "Yeah, I've been thinking about some projects that I've worked on in the past and how they might relate to the job I'm applying for. I've been invited to interview for a few jobs, and I wanted to know if you had any tips on how to prepare for them." So this question should feel significantly more difficult than the previous listen and respond question that we looked at. The reason is that all 5 of these options are quite relevant to the scenario. They're all about interviews and jobs and things like that. So none of them are obviously bad. And this is a good example of how you should always evaluate all of the options to find the best one. So let's now go through each option one by one. Option number 1 is, "I have a few upcoming interviews and I wanted to know if you had any suggestions on how I can improve my interviewing skills." So is this a good option? Yes. The scenario says that we are going in for interviews and we want to prepare. And this option is directly relevant to that. So this is a good option. We shouldn't eliminate it. Option number 2. "Well, I've never had a job interview in a foreign language before, so I'm not really sure what to expect. Do you have any suggestions on what I should do to prepare?" Is this a good option? Well, it may seem like it, but there's one detail that allows me to say that this is not quite a good option. And the detail is that it says, "I've never had a job interview in a foreign language before." The scenario had no mention of a foreign language, and therefore this option is not so relevant. So we can probably eliminate it. Option number 3. "I wanted to ask for your advice, actually. This is a really big opportunity for me, and I want to make sure that I'm as prepared as possible." So is this a good option? It may seem like it, but this one too, not quite. And the detail that was key is this is a really big opportunity for me. So this is referencing one specific opportunity, but that's not what the scenario describes. The scenario describes that you are going in for several job interviews, right? There's not just one opportunity or one job interview, but several. Option number 4. "Yeah, I've been thinking about some projects that I've worked on in the past and how they might relate to the job I'm applying for." Is this a good option? Not quite. Like with the others, it is related to the scenario. It's about job interviews. However, in this option, it talks about projects that I've worked on in the past, which is not anything that was mentioned in the scenario. So this is not quite a strong option. And option number 5. "I've been invited to interview for a few jobs, and I wanted to know if you had any tips on how to prepare for them." Is this a good option? Yes. This option is highly relevant, highly related to the scenario, and therefore it's a very strong option. So going back to all of the options, you can see that we've eliminated 2, 3, and 4, and now we're left with number 1 and number 5. So the question is, which one is better? Option number 1, I have a few upcoming interviews and I wanted to know if you had any suggestions on how I can improve my interviewing skills. Option number 5, I've been invited to interview for a few jobs and I wanted to know if you had any tips on how to prepare for them. So which one is more closely related to the scenario? The answer is option number 5. I've been invited to interview for a few jobs, right? That was in the scenario. And I wanted to know if you had any tips on how to prepare for them. So the reason that we could eliminate option number 1 is that the scenario never mentions interview skills. It mentions preparing for interviews. So that's how I was able to identify number 5 as the best one. All right, so don't forget, evaluate all options so that you can find the best answer. Tip number 3, make sure the first part of the option makes sense. So a quick way to eliminate options is to look at the first part of each option. So here's an example from later in the conversation. Let's see. This is what the professor says. First of all, you should make sure that you are familiar with the mission and the values of the organization. They will likely ask you questions about how your experience and skills align with those. And these are your options. Okay, that makes sense. What else? You obviously put a lot of work into this. No, I didn't think of that. Oh yeah, that's right. How's that going? We can try that. Thanks for working with me on this. So if we just look at the beginning of each of those options, can we eliminate any of them? So option number 1 is, okay, that makes sense. Is okay, that makes sense an appropriate response to what the professor says? Yes, that's a very natural response. It makes perfect sense. Option number 2, you obviously put a lot of work into this. Does this make sense? No, this isn't a logical response to what the professor said. Right? The question that I ask is, put a lot of work into what? The professor doesn't mention something that he's working on. Option number 3, no, I didn't think of that. Does this make sense? No. Your professor didn't ask you a yes or no question, so it doesn't make sense if you respond no when you're not asked a yes or no question. Option number 4, oh yeah, that's right. How's that going? Does oh yeah, that's right make sense? Kind of, maybe. But then how's that going doesn't make sense, right? Because your professor didn't mention something he is working on, right? How is what going? He doesn't mention anything. And finally, we can try that. Thanks for working with me on this. Does we can try that make sense? No. Your professor doesn't suggest something that you should try. So, given that, we can quickly eliminate 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you can see the only logical response is the first one. Okay, that makes sense. What else? Tip number 4, save time to review the conversation. So once you finish all of the listen and respond questions, and you click next, you will go to the summarize the conversation question, which we are going to cover in the next lesson. Before you go to the summarize the conversation question, you should take time to review the conversation. So re-listen to the scenario and go through the conversation and understand the key points and what was talked about, because you will need that information in order to effectively summarize the conversation. So you should save about 30 seconds in the first part of interactive listening so that you can review the conversation. All right, so let's recap all the things that we covered in this lesson because it was quite a long one. So the interactive listening question type was updated on July 1st, 2025. So make sure that you don't look at old study materials. Number 2, For Listen and Complete, Duolingo likes to ask about: who are you talking to? Why are you talking to them? And what academic subject is relevant to your discussion? You can listen to the scenario as many times as you like during the Listen and Complete and during the Listen and Respond portion. When you go to the Summarize the Conversation question, however, you cannot look at any part of the conversation anymore. For Listen and Respond, use process of elimination. Evaluate all options in order to find the best one. Make sure the first part of the option makes sense. If it doesn't, you can eliminate that option. Save time, about 30 seconds, to re-listen to the scenario and review the conversation. So from here, I would recommend two things. First, watch our lesson on Summarize the Conversation, which you can find here, and also go and practice interactive listening questions. The best way to do this is inside of Arno. We give you unlimited practice questions for every question type for free, including the new interactive listening question format. So all you need to do is to click the link down in the description, create your free account, and you will be practicing in no time.